Hello and welcome to the special edition of the SYS podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm going to talk about a few things I did with the writing of the screenplay that allowed us to shoot this film on a low budget, so stay tuned for that. Right now, as this podcast is published, I'm running at the end of the Kickstarter campaign to raise money for post-production for the Rideshare Killer. If you've been thinking about contributing some money, now is definitely the time, as the campaign ends in just a few days. It ends Monday, February 17th at 6 p.m. Pacific time. So again, if you've been procrastinating, please go ahead and check it out. I posted a bunch of new rewards last week that are geared towards screenwriters, so do have a look at those as well. I'm basically selling a good number of the SYS services at a discount. If you contribute through Kickstarter, you can get a script analysis, normally $89 for just $79. You can get the email fax blast to producers, normally $159. It's only $109 through Kickstarter. You can also add on the agent and manager's blast, so you get the producer's blast and the agent and manager's blast all for $200. Normally I sell that for $250. And then the last big thing is the SYS Select bundle, which is it's a $760 value, but it's only $500, and that gets you pretty much all of the SYS Select services. You get one email and fax blast to producers, one email and fax blast to agents and managers. You get a 1-year subscription to SYS Select, and then you also get an SYS Script Analysis 3-pack, where you can have 3 of your scripts reviewed, or you can have 1 script reviewed 3 times, any combination of that. So again, check out those rewards if those might be of interest to you. Again, hopefully this is a real win-win. You get some help with your project, and obviously I get some help with mine. So again, do check those out, and you can just go to the ridesharekiller.com, and that will take you to our Kickstarter page. Again, the campaign ends a few days, so please don't procrastinate any longer if you are interested in contributing. Every little bit helps, and a big thanks to all the people that have already contributed. There's been a good number of people I've been emailing with and just, answering questions and getting to know a little bit more. A lot of the people that I've gotten to know over the years just running this podcast. So again, big thanks to everybody who has contributed. And again, I'll link to it all in the show notes, but again, you can just go to the ridesharekiller.com if you have any interest in checking that out. Anyways, that's my pitch for today. So now let's talk about writing the low budget feature film and some things specifically that I did which made it possible for us to shoot the Rideshare Killer on a very, very low budget. So the single biggest thing that I did in the writing of the screenplay was the locations. I've talked about this before. We ended up spending very little on locations, I think well less than $2,000. We had to pay probably close to $1,000 for the nightclub scene. That's at the beginning of the script, and we were there for 1 day. I don't remember the exact price, but maybe $800-900, something like that. We used the sets at a place called LA Grip in Burbank. We shot a bunch of office and police station type of scenes there, and we also shot in the front of LA Grip and also the back alley of LA Grip. We did pay something for these locations, but it was all intermixed. We also rented our grip equipment from them, and we did a whole co-production package through LA Grip, so it's hard to figure out exactly how much money was spent on those locations. It was all sort of part of this package deal, but again, it wasn't a huge amount. And then we did, we had a motel set. We paid like $100. We were there for an afternoon. It was actually a really cool motel set that a set designer had built in his apartment, of all places. And it's really cool. And I look forward to people seeing the film, because it was a really cool motel set. And again, we gave him $100 for the afternoon. So there were some little things like that where we did pay for locations. But as I said, totally, I would say was less than $2,000. And again, keeping in mind the total budget is about $75,000. That's a very, very small amount for locations. But the main location was a house, and we shot 10 of the 17 days there. And that's what really saved us on budget, not having to pay a lot of money for that house. Now, taking a step back, I mean, this was by design. I thought all of this through when I wrote the script. I had shot a couple of days at LA Grip when I did the pinch a few years ago, so I knew exactly what sets they had and what sets we could use. So again, when I'm writing the script, I kind of envisioned all the different sets that I had available to me, that I knew I had available to me, and that really impacted what I wrote and just impacted what scenes I let end up be in this script. The nightclub was one I knew we'd pay something for. I didn't have any sort of an in, and I kind of figured we'd probably end up spending probably $1,000 on that set. But it's at the opening of the movie. It's literally the first scene in the movie, so I wanted to have a cool opening. And I think just in general, especially for low budget films, you want to put some production value at the beginning of the movie. A lot of the distributors, even just a lot of the people that watch on Amazon or Netflix or whatever, they're gonna, if it looks really cheap and low budget at the beginning of the movie, you're probably going to lose some of your audience. A lot of the distributors that watch these movies, they're not that interested. They're only going to watch the first 5 or 10 minutes of your movie and make a decision. So you want the opening to be a little bit bigger perhaps than the rest of the movie. So that was sort of my thinking there. I knew we would have to spend some money on that one set. But again, I knew if we could get the house for free or next to free, that would really save us. Because again, that was 10 of our 17 days shooting. So well more than half the script takes place at this one location. Now, there were some little things that we had to do on the fly. I actually wrote in a couple of days, we were going to shoot at this like a trendy art gallery where there was like this sort of party going on. I couldn't find any place I liked for next to no money because again, we needed to keep the location budget really, really low. So we ended up changing that to a house. We actually used Tony. He's one of the producers. We ended up shooting at his house for a day and a half, and we just basically set the party up there, and it worked totally. It was fine. I thought it actually looked good. And was probably actually better than what we could have rented, even for $500 or $800. I don't know that we would have found it. And again, we needed that location for 2 days, so it was a little bit more difficult. Again, going back to the nightclub, when I wrote that, again, I knew we would probably have to pay for that, but I kept it so it was like 5 pages or less. So I knew we could shoot that in a day. We would only have to be there for a day. It wasn't something we're gonna have to spend $1,000 a day for 3 days. We could spend $1,000 a day for 1 day and get everything we needed. So again, thinking these things through, I'd say that's one piece of advice. If you've never shot anything that you've written, shooting 5 script pages a day is pretty good work. You don't probably want to go, if it's just dialogue, like 2 people sitting, so there are certain things you can shoot quicker, but just in general, I mean, you can do the math. This was like an 85-page script divided by 17 days. So you're talking 4 or 5 pages a day on average. Some days were 7, 8 pages. Some days were, 2, 3 pages, just somewhat depends. But again, that's a good rule of thumb. It's something to keep in mind if you do your own, if you're planning on shooting your own film. You're not going to want to shoot much more than 5 pages, again, on average, in a day. So if you have a big location or a big set piece, try and keep it 5 pages or less so that it might be tough, but you can get in there and you can get that done in 1 day, again, saving your budget. Now, I see a lot of producers looking for one location feature films, and I'm not a big fan of this. I kind of feel like that's taking it too far. I think, and I'll be curious to see, but I could say the same thing about The Pinch. I mean, The Pinch was a 15-day shoot, and 9 of the days were at the one house. And I feel like anyways, and maybe some of you have seen it and would agree or not agree, but it's not super claustrophobic. I've never seen one of these one location films that didn't feel incredibly claustrophobic. And obviously there's some advantages, and I see sort of production-wise, but I think you're really, unless you're really, really creative, and unless your one location is really broad. I mean, like if your one location is like a farm with a woods, then you can really do a lot with that one location. But if you're talking about one house, it makes the film feel very claustrophobic and low budget. And that I've just never seen a one location movie that didn't feel that way, to me anyways. Part of it sometimes is the shtick. Certainly the Ryan Reynolds movie Buried, that was their shtick, was one location, and it did feel claustrophobic, but that was sort of the whole point to it. So in that case, maybe it's not a bad idea. But again, the way this is, it was 10 pages of the 17 days, but it's very much spread out. So when the film is edited together, those 10 days of shooting are going to be spread out throughout the entire movie. The third act is pretty much all, so like the last 20 pages, 25 pages is pretty much all at the house, because the killer shows up at the house, and that's kind of how it wraps up. But again, I don't think it's going to feel like a one location feature film. And so you kind of get a hybrid. You kind of get the best of both worlds. It's, more than half of your film is at one location. But if it's done creatively, some good editing, you should be fine. And again, it shouldn't have that very, very claustrophobic feel. The The other thing that I always had in the back of my mind was that I could shoot this at my house if absolutely necessary. Again, that was me going into the writing process. We did end up using my house for one scene. We did about a half day at my house shooting this one scene. But again, in the back of my mind as I'm writing this thing, thinking if worse comes to worse, I could shoot this at the house. Now, the house we ended up getting was much better. It wouldn't have been great at my house. My house is just too suburban. There's too many houses, and I think it would have felt a little weird to have a killer chasing people around in such a suburban area. And the house we found felt a little bit more remote, and that was important to the story. So again, if I had to, I could have made some compromises, but I went into it again with the writing. I always had kind of a backup plan, something just in the back of my mind. I say, well, if worse comes to worse, I could rewrite this thing and make it work with my own house. So again, those are the sorts of things that I think you got to be thinking about when you're writing the script. Again, I've talked about this before. At least in LA, finding really quality cast at a reasonable price, that's fairly easy. There's tons of actors in LA, so I wasn't too worried about the keeping the cast small. It wasn't a huge cast. I mean, you can go on IMDb and look at how many actors we had. There was probably, I bet there was 20 speaking roles, though. All told, I bet there was 20 speaking roles. So I would say if you're not in LA where there's a good pool of actors, I probably would not go that direction. I probably would try and keep the cast limited as well, because that's another thing that can really sink a low budget film, is having people that can't act in your film. And so the chances of finding good actors outside of LA is difficult. So keeping your cast smaller will give you the advantage of not having to find 20 good actors. You might only have to find 4 or 5 good actors, and your chances will be much better. So again, outside of LA, I think I probably would worry a little bit more about the actors. But again, the big thing here was just the locations. Is I knew that we're going to take every bit of money we have and we're going to put it into the actors, the cast, the crew, and that sort of stuff, but not the locations, because I knew we had a bunch of locations that we could get for free. And again, that just informed from the get-go, from when I thought of this as a premise. I knew this was something that I potentially would want to shoot, or even if I didn't shoot it, I knew it would be like a low budget, it's a horror thriller, a low budget horror thriller film. So I knew that would be important to a producer. Even if I hadn't shot it, it would have been important to the producer that did ultimately want it. I also felt like, again, this is part of just being creative. I mean, the basic premise of this movie is these people that run this ride-sharing app, they have a house that's sort of like it's a startup, a bootstrapped startup, much like the HBO show Silicon Valley, where there's a bunch of tech people at just a private residence. They've set up kind of an office in that. And that was sort of what we were going for with this house. And I think it worked well. Again, it worked for the premise. This was a bootstrap startup. People are kind of used to this situation. And there's even a little bit of dialogue that kind of explains it. The father of one of the women who kind of is funding this startup, he makes a comment about owning the house, and that kind of stuff. So again, story-wise, hopefully it worked, but sometimes you do have to be a little creative, because I think the sort of the more intuitive choice would have been to maybe have like an office, get some sort of an office setup. But I knew that would be more expensive. Renting an office and shooting in an office would be much more expensive than, again, finding a house, that would work. And I think I was correct in that assessment. Again, in LA, locations are very, very expensive. So you've really got to be thoughtful in trying to write the low budget feature film. Again, especially if you're in LA, really think about the locations you have available. That's what I was doing. As I said, I mean, I knew what I had over at LA Grip. I was pretty certain I would be able to cut another deal with them like I did with The Pinch. I knew my house. Tony, as I said, one of the other producers, I knew what house he had. As we were doing rewrites on this thing. So it really needs it needs to be really at the very, very beginning level, is kind of having some understanding of where you're going with this project. And it's just going to make it easy, even if it's not something you want to shoot, which I totally get that. A lot of people just want to be the writer, but writing something with simple locations like houses, like apartments, maybe an office, maybe a park, especially if you're outside of New York or if you're outside of LA, parks, you don't often, obviously in LA, in New York, you do need permits, but outside of a lot of these big cities. You don't need permits to shoot. I had a friend that shot, I think it was in Oklahoma City, and they went up to like the state capitol and they just shot a scene on the state capitol outside, and people would stop and look and stuff, but they didn't have any permits or anything like that. I mean, if you tried that in LA or New York, you would be shut down very, very quickly. So again, think about sort of what you have. What do you have as an advantage? What are the things you can use, and let that inform your writing, and it will, again, it will be helpful for a producer, even if you're not going to be the producer. Keeping these things in mind and understanding, where the money goes and how it's spent. Because someone has to find those locations. I mean, if a producer reads a script that he really likes and all the locations and a lot of the production stuff is like simple, like that's a win, for him. That's something that's really, really going to interest him. If there's all kinds of exotic locations, if he loves the script, but there's exotic locations, there's cars, there's explosions, there's things that he doesn't think he can do or things he doesn't think he can do for the budget. It's another thing that detracts from him potentially optioning or producing your movie. And it's not always just, write a great story. A lot of producers, they have a finite amount of resources. And so unfortunately, it's not as simple as this, I love this script, let's go make it. I love this script, but I don't have the resources to make it. I mean, that's where a lot of producers are. And you're helping them out if you start to understand budget and you start to understand production and sort of the logistics and how all of this stuff comes together. Anyways, that's my 2 cents on the locations of the Rideshare Killer, and hopefully just me explaining sort of how all that worked is valuable to you. If you have any questions or comments, I'm easy to get a hold of. You can always send an email, info@sellingyourscreenplay.com. Anyways, that's what I have for today. Please do go and check out the Kickstarter campaign if you're still wondering about that. There's a whole bunch of teaser trailers. I think at this point I've probably got 4 or 5 teaser trailers up there that you can click around and you can watch. You can see some of the actual scenes kind of cut together. And again, just go to theridesharekiller.com. Anyway, that's the show for today. I hope you got some value out of it. Thank you for listening.